Fellow traveler, step closer into the slow light of history. Mist lies low over the river, and the first gulls break the surface of sound. You smell tar and rice and ink. Your palms remember rope even before you touch it. You lean on a piling and watch men move like a single organism. Carpenters, clerks, sailors, soldiers, each performing a small economy of motion. The quay is a nervous mouth at the edge of empire, and something larger than a ship is being prepared. An imperial will made portable. The scene is not a single appointed pier, but a stretch of wooden fingers and back alleys along the lower Yangtze, where ships from nearby yards creak and bruise the water. Historians point to places such as Taicang and the outer docks of Nanjing as probable mustering sites for the voyages we now call Zheng He's treasure fleet. Ming court documents and later records require interpretation, so the precise patch of quay is not settled beyond doubt. What is certain is the character of the place. Riverine, industrious, and brimful of the preparations that make a long voyage possible. The vessels are immediately obvious. Even from a distance, their hulls read as architecture, broad-beam treasure ships whose sides rise like house walls, smaller supply junks nested against them, and lighter scouting vessels waiting like anxious birds. Carpenters bend over joints, forcing hemp and pine pitch into seams until wood and fiber refuse to part. Sailors lash down bulging sacks of rice and stack barrels of salted meat. Cooks begin the slow, necessary alchemy of converting staple grain into shipboard nourishment that will sustain men through months of empty horizon. Paperwork arrives in waves. Eunuch officials, servants of the Yongle court's vast household apparatus, move with a measured rhythm. Bundles bound in red cord are opened and read aloud. The imperial seal, the emperor's voice reduced to wax and thread, will rest upon the manifest of every ship that sails under the court's colors. Zheng He, known in the records as He of Yunnan, is present in this bureaucratic choreography not merely as a captain, but as a trusted commander whose role ties palace intent to maritime motion. His presence, like many facts of the day, is better seen by the trace it leaves, orders issued, ships assigned, than by a single scene from which to draw a portrait. The people who gather form a practical mosaic. There are sailors who read currents as others read letters, soldiers drilled to display the empire's force, interpreters fluent in Malay and Arabic so the fleet may speak in many ports, shipwrights whose hands alone know the temper of a plank. Muslim traders and navigators stand beside court clerks. Their stars and charts, celestial knowledge learned from generations on the Indian Ocean, will guide the fleet where maps end. Cooks, tailors, and doctors bustle among them, each necessary to the slow economy of long-distance voyaging. Provisions are an art of careful redundancy. Sacks of rice are stacked like low walls. Jars hold preserved vegetables and salted fish. Barrels of vinegar and oil wait to season monotony. Wooden boxes contain silk and lacquer, currency and diplomatic token both, wrapped and inventoried for distant courts. Chests of porcelain are packed against rough motion. Bundles of rope and spare rigging are labeled and stowed. Cannon and arquebuses are inspected and oiled, not solely for war, but also to ensure a tangible show of force where the emperor's writ must be demonstrated. Sound accumulates like a score, the rasp of rope through a block, the clank of a hammer, the squawk of birds, a child's laughter from a tide barge. Smells layer, brine and tar, the sweet dryness of tea drying in the sun, the metallic tang of coin and ink. Heat begins to gather as the sun climbs and soaks into the planks. Men pause, palm their brows, and resume with the stamina learned by repetition. Ceremony threads through work. Officials sign and countersign. A minister walks the quay and nods at manifests. A small procession will later carry instruments, compasses, star charts, letters of safe conduct, to the flagship. The way a chest of brocade is wrapped, which name is listed first on a manifest, how the seal is impressed, these are deliberate acts. They are diplomatic grammar as much as logistics. Gestures meant to be legible across oceans and in courts that will judge meaning by objects and ritual. Yet, beneath paper and ceremony lies an older, wetter authority, the sea. Experienced pilots remind one another that wind and current answer to no seal. Men measure time not only by watches but by tide, and by the slow, patient calculus of provisioning. Readiness on land, manifests closed, gifts wrapped, orders signed, meets the sea's indifferent power. The quay holds a delicate balance between the certainty of ink and the uncertainty of weather. By midday, the last sacks are lashed, and lanterns tested for night watches. A clerk closes a ledger with a small, precise snap, and looks out over the water, as if reading the future in its slow undulations. A paper boat launched by a child slips into an eddy and disappears. Around it, men button cloaks and steady the last bundles. The fleet is nearly ready, but near readiness is not the same as leaving. The horizon will demand its own confirmations. A pilot comes forward to speak of the tide. A carpenter shrugs and reaches again for a mallet. The quay holds its breath, and the river keeps its counsel. The courtyard behind the temporary office on the quay is quieter than the pier itself, as if volume has been traded for precision. Here the work is not of rope and timber, but of ink and authority. A long table stands beneath a tiled eave. Clerks sit shoulder to shoulder, writing, folding, tying. Parchments, smooth sheets of mulberry paper, and stitched bundles of court forms stack like small altars. The air smells of ink and beeswax, faintly sweet against the briny gusts that sweep in from the river. An imperial messenger arrives, his robes plain, but his manner exact, the manner of someone who carries a word no one else may alter. He carries scrolls wrapped with red cord and bound with thin strips of lacquered bamboo. Those scrolls are not only instructions, they are the emperor's voice translated into bureaucracy. Each scroll is accompanied by a small wooden box holding impressions and instruments, seals, brushes, and the red cinnabar paste that will give an edict its unmistakable face. Eunuch officials, courtmen whose existence is the court's secret architecture, move among the table and the clerks. In Yongle's household, the eunuch bureaucracy is vast and unusually trusted. They are the hands that extend palace commands beyond the inner court. Zheng He, himself a eunuch of Yunnan birth, who rose into the emperor's confident circle, watches without fanfare. He watches the ritual in which paper becomes writ and writ becomes will. He understands, as the sailors do not, that the life of the fleet at sea will be governed as much by what is written on that paper as by the charts they carry. Orders fall into categories: manifest lists of cargo, the lists of gifts and tribute designated for foreign rulers, specific instructions about treatment of envoys and captives, directives on how to display imperial authority in ports abroad, and logistical notes: who commands which ship, how each vessel is to be provisioned, which officers are to report directly to the fleet admiral. The emperor's primary purpose is not simple plunder or trade. These are projection voyages, to reassert Ming presence across Indian Ocean routes, to gather tribute, and to build networks of safe passage that will ease Chinese commerce and prestige. The scrolls make that intention legible, offering ceremony to shape encounters before they happen. A clerk reads aloud from one scroll, his voice steady despite the importance of the words. When the passage names ports, the language is careful. Honorifics to distant rulers, titles to be used, gifts to be exchanged. When the passage names the fleet's uses, protection of Chinese merchants, acceptance of tributary missions, the tone is administrative, precise, almost cool. Then the seal is brought forward. The seal is not merely a stamp, but an emblem of legitimacy. It is pressed into paste, and the red leaves a bright, stubborn mark on the paper. There is an economy to the act: who places the seal, how many seals a document bears, and the order in which they are impressed. These details travel with the fleets and matter in distant courts that read signs as well as language. An imperial seal on a missive means that a local ruler is expected to treat the bearer not as a private merchant, but as the representative of an empire's will. In that sense, parchment and paste become a kind of artillery. Practicalities attend the ceremony. Each document is recorded in a ledger. A clerk tallies the number of silk bolts, counts the boxes of porcelain, and notes the quantity of coins set aside for gifts. These lists will be audited later, and discrepancies will be remembered. Men who will never see the distant courts care about the small arithmetic of goods, because those goods are the fleet's currency, the physical proof of a state's capacity to reward and to bind allies. There are also private notations, scrawled in margins by those who know how to read more than the letter of the law. A line, barely perceptible, might mark a parcel meant for an old friend of the admiral. Another might note where particular medical supplies are stored. Such marks are the soft infrastructure of loyalty, the human traces that make an enormous operation move smoothly despite its scale. They are not conspiracies but practices, small economies of trust that lubricate the larger machinery of empire. When the documents are sealed, they are bundled into cases that will ride aboard the flagship and the vessels that accompany it. A palace clerk hands a wrapped bundle to Zheng He. He accepts it with the casual gravity of a man lifting both responsibility and constraint. The bundle is not a private thing. It contains the emperor's direction, how far to press, where to halt, how to be seen. In ports, the fleet will be judged not only on its might, but on its scrupulous adherence to these instructions. Failure to observe them would be not merely error, but a breach of court discipline. Success would be a herald of imperial order written across the ocean. Yet even as the seal imparts authority, there is an undercurrent of improvisation. The imperial court knows that once the fleet leaves the shelter of familiar coasts, circumstances will shift. Pilots' knowledge, monsoon timing, politics, and distant polities, all these variables mean that sealed orders must be carried with a degree of interpretive freedom. Zheng He's judgment, which the court trusts, will often be the engine that translates formal command into action on the waves. The sealed scrolls thus become a map of intent and a set of constraints, and the admiral's art is to navigate between them. A short ceremony follows. A minister intones a formal line about the empire's mission, hands are clasped, and a servant carries a small chest of gifts, silk, silver, porcelain, toward the flagship. These physical tokens travel alongside the letters. Gifts will be offered as a demonstration of benevolent might. The material and the textual proceed together. Silk speaks of wealth. The seal speaks of sovereignty. The fleet's diplomacy will be shown in banners and in language, and in the careful choreography by which both are presented. As midday light slides toward afternoon, the clerks begin the last round of checks. A young scribe cross-references manifest and cargo list, and ticks each entry with a practiced pen. Somewhere beyond the eaves a boy runs past, carrying a bundle of spare cable. His boots slap the boards like a reminder that bureaucracy and labor are twin necessities of voyage. The bundles are plated into cases, and an officer takes them down the gangway toward the flagship. On the deck, the wind is slightly stronger, and the river seems to push back as if testing the fleet's readiness. The admiral walks a careful circle of command, his eyes meeting the faces of captains and pilots in a manner that asks for competence and gives authority in return. Still, not everything that must be done is finished. Paper can carry the emperor's will, but it cannot mend a hull nor make a mast stand truer. The seals are impressed, orders are in hand. On the river, work continues, where craft and salt and sweat must finally answer the empire's paper. The smell of fresh-cut timber and white-hot pitch defines the shipyard as surely as the sound of hammers. Here, at the water's edge, the fleet's true heart is hammered into shape. Carpenters move with the quiet authority of people who have learned to speak the grammar of wood, measuring, scarfing, truing. Their work is not merely craft, but an embodied knowledge of what keeps a vessel whole under stress, how a plank will breathe when the hull flexes, where a rung must bear weight, how joinery must allow motion without becoming a wound. Chinese shipbuilding in this era draws on older traditions, patterns of joinery, an emphasis on compartmentation, and a practical understanding of materials that make the ships resilient. Bulkheads subdivide hulls into watertight sections, an arrangement later chroniclers praise for its contribution to seaworthiness. Timbers are selected and seasoned with care. Frames are fastened in ways meant to distribute shock rather than concentrate it. The exact proportions and the most extreme figures for treasure ship size have been debated by scholars. Some contemporaneous accounts swell numbers into near legend, and later historians caution restraint. Still, the process at the slipway is plain enough to anyone watching. Large beams, close-fitting planks, and a labor that insists on redundancy. Caulking is what makes joins honest. After planks are fitted, fiber and paste are forced into seams until they refuse to let water through. The material, often local fibers such as hemp or cotton, combined with a resinous or lime-based compound, must be packed and tamped evenly. A caulker's rhythm is a stolid song. Fill, tamp, strike home. If a seam drinks even a little, what begins as a trickle becomes a slow, merciless eroder of confidence on long voyages. Thus, caulking becomes ritual and responsibility. It is a place where pride and the practical meet. Around the yards, the tools tell a story. Broad adzes, long planes, mallets nicked by decades of use. Blacksmiths sharpen cleats and fashion iron straps. Riggers splice lines and braid thick hawser capable of holding yards and anchors. Each station bleeds into the next, an interdependence that makes haste both possible and risky. Templates and master patterns guide many dimensions, but much is resolved by feel, by an old carpenter's eye, and the flattening of a plane on a newly dressed plank. Work in the yard is organized yet improvisational. Spare planks and extra cleats are set aside for quick repair. Small teams are assigned to particular hulls and become intimate with their curves. When a mast step settles into a keel, the men who watch it know which brace will rescue it if the first wind tests its hold. Carpenters trade stories of near disasters and clever fixes, the verbal catalogs of practical wisdom that apprentices memorize along with measuring marks. Those tales are more than boasting. They are pedagogy, the method by which tacit knowledge is passed. There is urgency now. The court's timetable presses like a tide. Orders from the quay demand stores counted, crews must be mustered, and a fleet must begin to cohere as a single instrument. Shipwrights answer with plans and then with sweat. Hulls that might in peacetime take months are assembled in weeks. The tension between speed and prudence is a constant. Hurried caulking can be repaired at sea, but a structural error can end a voyage. Inspectors, sometimes court agents, sometimes experienced pilots, walk the slipways with an unsparing eye. They note seams, examine tree nails, tap ribs with a practiced hand. Their verdict can slow a launch by days. At the center of the yard, one ship demands attention. A vessel assigned to carry lavish gifts and important personnel, a ship meant to present imperial dignity as much as to transport it. Its keel runs long and true. Men climb its ribs like workers setting a small, timbered city. The planking takes on an almost ceremonial rhythm. Boards passed, planed, fitted, and fastened until the hull's skin becomes continuous. Tree nails are driven home, and pegs swell with moisture to lock timber to timber. The final major planks are heavy and exacting to shape. Each must sit in perfect curve or invite strain when the hull flexes in a long swell. There is a brief charged silence when two masters set the last of those major planks. Around them, the yard seems to pause as if listening for a seam to speak. The plank slides into place, mallet taps, and then the caulking begins, fingers packing hemp, a stick tamping it true, pitch rubbed warm into the line to bind and seal. Men breathe, not because they are tired, but because they share in an achievement that will outlast them. For a moment, the ship feels whole in a way it never did before. Still, even near complete work can harbor uncertainty. A pilot runs a hand along the curve and frowns, a small warp, barely visible to anyone but a man who reads waterlines for a living. He signals for a brace to be adjusted. Braces shift, wedges are driven, and the hull answers with a faint groan, as if the wood were thinking through its new shape. That sound is not complaint so much as negotiation, the living conversation between craft and material. Beyond the physical tasks, the shipyard is a social arena. Contracts are negotiated, wages parceled, favors traded. A carpenter may take his family home to shore for a day and bring back a child's crude drawing fastened to a beam for luck. Old grudges and small debts are set aside when a mast must be raised by a dozen hands. In those moments, the yard becomes a singular organism whose cohesion depends on more than skill alone. When the last caulking is tamped and the lanterns are hung to dry pitch in the warm air, the ship breathes small and steady as if settling for sleep. The yard loosens, men wipe hands on cloths and pass small jokes. Yet outside the slipway, the river waits, patient, indifferent, and the true test lies ahead. A hull, even perfected on the shore, answers most honestly to sky and swell. The stores form a small, practical world, packed into contoured holds and shadowed lockers where light comes thin and work is measured in handfuls. You can map a ship by its stores, the lower hold stacked with rice sacks, the mid-hold where earthenware jars and pickled vegetables sleep in brine, the forward lockers for rope and spare spars, and nearer the stern, the small guarded chest where gifts and imperial cloth are kept. Men who tend stores move with a kind of careful priesthood. They know which sack is oldest, which crate must be opened first when the sea grows long, and which barrels need airing before mildew takes claim. Provisions are chosen for longevity first and taste second. Rice, white or only lightly milled, forms the Voyage's stomach, dense, reliable, and familiar. Salted fish and pork hang in smokehouses on some vessels or lie in barrels pressed with layers of salt. Dried beans and compressed soy cakes are stowed with care. Pickled vegetables, preserved in brine and vinegar, arrive in sealed jars. sourness that acts like a tonic against monotony and supplies modest vitamins that help steady the crew when fresh greens are scarce. Tea is stored not only for warmth, but as medicine and ritual, a reminder of home when the horizon offers only water. Preserved flavor matters almost as much as preservation itself. Sauces, soy, fermented bean paste, varieties of vinegar are the fleet's seasoning kit. Small chests hold peppercorns, star anise, and cassia bark, spices costly in space, yet invaluable for morale and for diplomacy. Lacquered boxes contain aromatic resins and camphor used for scent and remedy. Porcelain crates are cushioned with straw, destined for courts from Sumatra to Hormuz. Their fragile whiteness is a tangible translation of imperial refinement and a deliberate offering in a world that often judges worth by objects. The galley is an improvisational theater. On larger junks, a sheltered area is set aside for cooking. On smaller boats, iron braziers are mounted and tended with strict discipline to avoid catastrophe. Cooking at sea is an exercise in restraint. A boil that spills, a stray ember, an unsteady stack of rice chests, any of these can produce disaster. Cooks and their apprentices become sober overseers who keep watch not only over flavor, but over safety. They measure wood, ration coals, and organize fuel into predictable shifts so the flame answers need without turning stores into tinder. Cooks are practical chemists. They steam rice in large iron cauldrons, simmer salted meat with beans into thick stews, and dose vinegar and soy to counter the flatness of long-stored grain. The everyday menu reads humble: rice with pickled greens, a thin slice of salted fish, a small bowl of bean broth, but efficiency makes it flavorful. For officers and envoys, a cook will prepare more elaborate fare: braised pork scented with star anise, pickled lotus root, or a reduced sauce that dignifies diplomatic gatherings with edible proof of care. Food at sea is both sustenance and statement. Preserving water is another art. Casks are inspected and rotated. Barrels are stowed away from sun-warmed decks and checked for leaks. Rain capture, stretching cloth and channeling runoff into barrels during monsoon rains, extends reserves when the sky allows. Daily allotments are strict, one measure for washing, another for drinking. Ship physicians, when present, carry dried herbs and remedies, roots for fevers, powders for digestive complaints, poultices for wounds. But medicine at sea is limited and improvisational. The capacity to make remedies from constrained ingredients is as valuable as any barrel of supplies. Storage is also politics. Who holds the key to the chest of spices? Who signs the ledger when a jar is opened? These small acts enact rank and trust. The admiral's stores remain separate. Gifts destined for foreign courts are inventoried under seal and kept apart from the crew's rations. Petty quarrels over a cask's contents sometimes flare into larger disputes because stores are also pay and privilege. Yet most men obey the ledger because survival depends on order. A miscounted barrel might mean the difference between a fresh meal at the edge of a long voyage and the slow erosion of morale that accompanies repeated scarcity. Shipboard kitchens teach a cuisine of economy. Nothing is wasted. Rice water becomes broth. Bean dregs are reconstituted into soups. The thin ends of dried fish are crumbled as seasoning. Even the smallest scraps find purpose, fermented into sauces or fed to animals kept briefly aboard for fresh meat when ports allow. When the fleet is anchored at a friendly harbor, officers sometimes set up crate gardens, herbs and bean sprouts grown in shallow boxes on deck that provide a green freshness to officers' tables. These tiny gardens are more than garnish. They are evidence of care and a small rebellion against monotonous rations. By dusk, the galley takes on a steady ritual. Men line up with wooden bowls while a thick stew is ladled. The smell of simmered soy and preserved meat rises and fills the hold like a promise. Voices lower as hunger tames them. Stories circulate of strange coasts, clever pilots, storms weathered, tales folded into steam and shared like a communal menu. An officer tastes with attention. A cook watches for signs of approval. When the pots are emptied, hearths are banked, and inventories noted in the ledger before the night watch takes the deck and lanterns are hoisted. Yet the stores that sustain a fleet also mark its vulnerability. One spoiled barrel, one miscounted ledger, one forgotten repair in a galley hearth. Any of these small failures can amplify into severe crisis miles from the nearest friendly port. The sea is indifferent to human order. Holds are closed, chests are locked, and men brace for the moment when food becomes more than sustenance. It becomes the texture of survival and the currency of hospitality the fleet will offer to strangers and courts alike. Soon, the ship's stores will leave the safety of harbor, and the true test of provisions will begin on open water. The morning feels different from the quay's broader bustle. It is intimate and intense in a narrow, human way. Boarding is where the voyage ceases to be an abstract plan and becomes a collection of bodies set into motion. Crews climb gangways, clamp hands into railings, and take the places on board that will define their days for months. A hammock over the galley, a peg for a pot, the single plank in a sleeping locker that becomes a small kingdom. You sense the personal economy in these movements. Who sits near the cook, who claims a shady spot for a hammock, which hand is steady enough for the rigging. Composition is plural. The fleet draws from many human stocks. Veteran sailors from coastal provinces who read currents as a second language. Conscripted laborers taught rope and oar in a hurry. Soldiers shifted from coastal garrisons. Interpreters whose tongues braid Malay, Arabic, and regional dialects. And pilots whose knowledge of distant coasts fits on no single chart. Eunuchs and clerks embed imperial administration into the flotilla, while merchants, craftsmen, and a few foreign hands round out crews. Each group brings not just skill, but habit and expectation, and those differences must be woven into a functioning whole. Boarding is selection. Captains inspect faces, test competence, and allocate tasks. A helmsman is asked to show steadiness at the till. A gunner must prime a swivel and demonstrate care with fuse and powder. Those who tend the rigging are assigned to watch rotations that match skill to risk. Cooks, tailors, and caulkers receive tools and a measured space to work. The admiral's staff cross-checks musters against manifests. A missing name pauses departure until accounted for. The process is bureaucratic but humane. Paperwork that matters because lives and cargo depend on accuracy. The bond between men is practical and social. Shipboard hierarchies are layered. Formal rank, of course, but also the authority of craft. A veteran sailmaker's word can carry more weight than an officer's in a squall because his skill keeps canvas working. Informal leaders, splicers, steady helmsmen, the man who lifts humor in a long watch, become anchors of morale. Food and the distribution of comforts bind crews. A cook who saves pickled greens for a sick man trades taste for loyalty. Small kindnesses circulate as currency and hold the social fabric taut. Families sometimes come to the gangway, a wife who will tend a child ashore, a parent who presses a cloth for luck. Others leave dependents behind, their futures set by letters and legal notations. These human negotiations are part of the fleet's economy. Loans arranged, property entrusted, neighbors charged to collect wages. What people carry on to a ship, keys, a small charm, a sealed debt instrument, matters as much as any chest and often decides futures left on shore. Discipline is instituted gently and then strictly. Captains call muster and read regulations, watch schedules, penalties for theft, and emergency drill. New recruits receive compressed schooling in deck etiquette, how to coil a rope, how to tie a timber hitch, how to heave in concert. Drills start immediately, reefing, man overboard rehearsals, and the cadence of lowering and raising sail that knits individuals into teams. Practice is not mere routine. It is the concentration of habit that will keep men alive in confusion. The admiral's presence during boarding is managerial and moral. Surgeons and barber surgeons make last checks. They examine a cough, stitch a small cut, and advise captains on who should be excused from heavy work. Small medical chests, bandages, herbal drafts, cataplasms, are inventoried and stowed. These caregivers are practical lifelines. The ability to patch a man quickly can keep watches intact and prevent a wound from becoming contagious. Historical traces suggest Zheng He's command blended court authority with attention to such practical details, and his presence matters less as spectacle than as a guarantor of competence. Language and translation weave through the operation. Interpreters move briskly, compiling glossaries for ports, how to ask for water, how to offer silk, how to address a local ruler. Miscommunication ashore can sour a negotiation. Interpreters therefore curate phrases that will perform in local ceremonial registers. Their role is practical and political. A wrong word can inflame a port's reception and transform a friendly anchorage into a tense audience. The physical boarding itself is choreography. Bundles lowered, hammocks slung, lanterns hung. Sails are rolled and stowed to keep lines clear. Anchors are heaved to test cables. Ladders and railings are secured. Carpenters sweep for hairline cracks. Caulkers hold hemp, ready for emergency seams. The ship becomes a living machine whose upkeep begins before the first league is cut and continues without pause thereafter. An undercurrent of tension is constant. Proximity breeds illness, discipline strains. A single mistake, an open brazier, a mislaid barrel, can lead to disaster. As gangways are hauled and small boats begin to tug hulls, men trade pragmatic benedictions. Don't climb the mizzen in high wind. Check the lead every hour. Warnings that are both advice and small blessings. Such utterances are part map, part prayer. When the final roll call is read and boxes lashed, the crew takes positions. A last look is allowed. Hands squeeze, a whispered promise. Eyes meet across the quay. Then oars dip, and the convoy slips free. Boarding is complete, but the human configuration, alliances, debts, grudges, and loyalties, remains freshly arranged. Those patterns will be tested by sea, by weather, and by choices made under pressure. The first night watch will reveal the quality of what was sealed that morning. A well-trimmed sail, a properly coiled line, the presence of a man who knows the lead line's memory. Each small competence will matter. The fleet is now a body of men in motion. Its true trial begins when the first distant thunder of weather or diplomacy demands decisive action. The courtyard around the flagship hums with a different intensity than any other place on the quay, where carpenters and clerks worked with the mechanical certainty of craft and office. Here, decisions are made that will translate palace intention into movement. Zheng He, whose title binds him to both court and sea, occupies this space in a way that is equal parts administrative and practical. He must read manifests and inspect rigging, translate imperial policy into orders, and judge when to bend protocol to the weather's stubborn logic. A polished table stands beneath an awning where charts, sealed documents, and small personal items are laid out. The admiral consults star charts and oral reports from pilots, while eunuch clerks read aloud lists and confirmations, the bureaucratic pulse of the enterprise. Eunuchs in the Yongle household performed functions that extended the court's capacity into these logistics. Their presence here is at once ceremonial and functional. They verify lists, witness oaths, and ensure that the emperor's instructions leave no ambiguous margin. The admiral and his staff balance two authorities constantly, that of the seal and that of the sea. Zheng He's preparations are not theatrical. Men note how he moves among captains, how he listens to pilots with an eye for detail, how he tests a rope splice or the fit of a keel plank. Command here is practical competence as much as formal appointment. He speaks to pilots about currents, to carpenters about a mast's angle, to surgeons about medical stores. His questions narrow areas that might otherwise grow too wide with improvisation because the court trusts his judgment when letters alone cannot foresee the moment. The admiral's distinctive role includes logistical judgment calls. Which ship must take which gifts? How will escorts be arranged to protect supply junks? Who must remain near the flagship for dispatches and who can be detailed to the vanguard for scouting? These are not idle decisions. The distribution of gifts, silk, porcelain, coins, affects diplomatic outcomes. A misallocated chest can embarrass an emissary or fail to secure a ruler's goodwill. Zheng He oversees inventories, checks seals, and signs manifests, with a hand that both represents the emperor and accepts responsibility for what happens when paper meets ocean. There is a ritual attention to readiness. The admiral inspects the weapons and asks for demonstrations. A gunner will load and fire a swivel piece in controlled fashion, while officers watch for proper procedure. Mariners will show reefing under pressure. These exercises are not show but calibration. In an instant of crisis, men must move together, as if rehearsed for a single breath. The admiral's experience, his own service at court and at sea, allows him to see where drill must be tightened and where resources should be shifted. Pilots deliver reports with the bluntness of men who read weather and water as material evidence. Monsoon patterns are discussed in practical terms. The angle of a prevailing wind, the size of a forthcoming swell, whether a narrow estuary's current will prove cooperative or treacherous. Zheng He listens and then asks for mitigations. How to adjust the fleet's staging, whether to delay a departure by a tide, where to place scouts on the lead to probe channels at first light. The court's timetable has weight, but the admiral knows that the sea does not respect ink. Gifts for foreign courts are checked again and packed in guarded chests. The selection of which goods go to which port matters. silk and porcelain have diplomatic grammar. An envoy's chest is sealed in a particular way, with manifest copies kept by court clerks and aboard flagship stores. These physical tokens of the empire's wealth are also diplomatic instruments. The right combination of cloth, metalware, and coin can open an audience and set a tone of generosity and status that words alone might fail to secure. The admiral also reviews personnel. Men of proven loyalty and competence are assigned to sensitive duties: dispatch runners, watch leaders, and embassy stewards. Interpreters and pilots with prior experience in particular regions are slotted where their skills matter most. This careful matching of talent to task is one of the fleet's hidden strengths, its bureaucracy's ability to place people where knowledge will be most useful. Lastly, Zheng He performs the small human acts that matter in a large operation. He sets aside a chest of medicines he has personally approved, asks after a crewman's injured hand, and instructs a surgeon to recheck poultices. These gestures, practical, observable, humane, repay the court's trust by keeping the men who must sail alive and capable. They also reinforce authority in a way that commands cannot, competence that cares. The day tightens toward the moment of departure. The admiral signs the final manifests, the seals are inspected, and the flagship's bell sounds with a slow, steady resonance. Yet the sea has its own timetable. A pilot's last word about wind and tide may still force a decision that puts imperial schedule and maritime prudence into tension. A choice remains, one that will shape the first league the fleet cuts across open water. On the flagship's open deck at night, the world condenses into three things: sky, water, and the instruments that translate one into the other. The navigators gather beneath a canopy of cold light, their faces lit by the thin flame of a lantern and the hard geometry of stars above. Their tools are modest and durable, a lodestone compass that points a steady needle toward magnetic truth. Charts folded and refolded until their creases have the memory of many hands, lengths of knotted cord for measuring distance by stroke, and knowledge older than the instruments themselves. Navigation here is both art and apprenticeship. It is a practice learned at sea and in foreign ports, passed between mariner and mariner in half-sung formulas and in the quiet correction of a hand on a mast. The compass is central. Chinese sailors had used the magnetic needle for coastal piloting for generations, and by the early 15th century, its value for open water voyaging was clear. A mariner could set a heading in the dark, and trust that the needle, when read carefully and corrected for local variation, would hold a course the eye could not. But the needle is not an oracle. It demands interpretation. Pilots cross-check its readings with the stars, the sun's known path, and the feel of the swell beneath the hull. When the sky is cloudy, the compass's quiet certainty steadies the fleet. When the stars are sharp, celestial sighting gives further confidence. Stars are more than ornaments in this practice. They are coordinates tied to latitude and season. Pilots speak of the angle of a star above the horizon, of the drift of a familiar constellation, and of the slow courtship of the planets. They use the pole star when it is available, the height of particular stars to judge their latitudinal position, and the rising and setting points of constellations to anticipate the timing of monsoon winds. Knowledge of the heavens is practical. Citations of brightness, angle, and hour are translated into decisions about when to reef, when to seek shelter, and when to press on. Pilots also read the sea as a map. Color and swell speak in a language learned from years of watching the water. A greener sheen may indicate the near presence of a continental shelf or a shoal. A sudden change in current often announces a submerged reef. The way the waves meet a hull, short and choppy or rolling and long, tells a helmsman whether they travel on a coast current or across an open swell. Birds and marine life are informants. Flocks lingering at dusk suggest land within reach. Dolphins playing in the bow wake hint at upwelling and plentiful fish. These are the small, stubborn signs that, combined with instruments, make navigation survivable. Local pilots, men born along the coasts of the Malay world, Java, Sumatra, and other littoral realms, are invaluable. They carry place knowledge that no chart can fully capture: the hidden channels, deceptive sandbanks, and the particular tempers of currents at certain months. The fleets under Zheng He benefited from such expertise. When a pilot from a Maluku port speaks of a reef by a name that does not appear on an imperial chart, his captain listens. That name is a ledger of experience. The admiral's strategy is to weave these local knowledges into a larger pattern, match the emperor's route of intent to the pilot's knowledge of safe passage. Charts themselves are hybrid objects, part mnemonic, part instruction. They show coastlines approximated into lines and notations for safe anchorages. They bear the hand of many hands, scribes who record a pilot's warning, merchants who mark a useful harbor, and court clerks who copy and file the result. A chart read aloud by a pilot becomes a plan: where to set a lead, where to assist slack wind and send smaller craft forward to sound a channel, where to leave a small detachment to trade and then rejoin. A fleet's ability to move as a single unit depends on such coordinated reading. Time and season are as crucial as place. The monsoon is a sovereign actor in the Indian Ocean and the seas beyond. Navigators time departures to catch the favorable winds. They avoid the months when a contrary monsoon or a sudden swell will make a coast treacherous. Zheng He's voyages show a deliberate attention to seasonal rhythm. The fleet sets out to ride known currents, to meet winds that will shepherd them toward the Malay archipelago and the Indian Ocean, then to use reversal seasons to return. The knowledge of the monsoon is an old shared commodity across the Indian Ocean world, a pattern all mariners respect. The human element remains central. A helmsman who has spent his life reading the horizon may trust his eye over a new instrument until they reconcile. An interpreter who once sailed as a pilot in the Straits of Malacca will warn of a lane the court's map omits. Routine checks build discipline. Knots are tested, compass cards are checked for interruptions, lead lines are kept ready for sounding. At night, a sentinel will call out bearings. The helmsman answers with the slow economy of practiced speech, and the fleet responds in a choreography learned through repetition. Yet navigation is not solely technical. There is a ritual side. A pilot will consult a small personal talisman, a prayer offered to the local sea spirits, or to a household deity whose protection is thought useful in the face of storm. Such acts are not superstition in the pejorative sense, but rather complements to a body of practice. Belief and technique cohabit the same mind because both calm it. When dawn bends the sky into pale linen, the navigators cluster to compare notes. Charts are unfolded, stars are referenced against the compass, and decisions are argued and settled. Sometimes a pilot's insistence, for a more northerly line, for a tack set earlier than the court's schedule allows, forces a choice that weighs imperial intent against maritime prudence. These are not theoretical disputes. They determine whether the fleet makes port with honor, with gifts intact, and with crews ready to continue. As they seal their decisions into the admiral's log and set men to mark the leads and string the lines, the fleet prepares to translate sky into course. The navigators lock eyes with the horizon and with one another, aware that at the edge of what is known, a mistake can become catastrophe. Ahead lies not merely distance, but a theater of weather and diplomacy in which the smallest error of bearing may force an unwanted encounter, or reveal a place previously unmarked by the court's maps. The pilots have plotted a line of departure. The fleet will test that line against wind, belief, and the ungovernable sea. The act of giving is a kind of language at sea, compact, material, and precise. Gifts aboard the fleet are carefully chosen statements meant to be read in foreign courts. They must flatter, demonstrate the empire's wealth, and translate Ming ritual into objects that distant rulers can understand. On the docks and in the flagship's guarded hold, bolts of silk are rolled, porcelain crates are inventoried, boxes of coin are sealed, and small chests of medicinal herbs and lacquered wares are packed with descriptive lists. Each item is assigned not only by value, but by the particular meaning it will carry in a strange court. Selection is political. Eunuch clerks, court stewards, and the admiral consult inventories while the emperor's instructions set broad priorities. A regional ruler who prizes textiles will receive brocades and fine silk. A maritime prince who prizes ceremony may be offered a lacquered vessel, mirrors, or bronze ware. Gifts are calibrated by rank and by anticipated local custom. A petty chief might receive useful metalwork and cloth, while a sovereign receives larger gifts and a formal letter bearing the imperial seal. Choosing what to send is an exercise in reading the tastes and the status codes of places the court knows only by rumor and previous reports. Presentation matters as much as content. On shore, the admiral's envoys rehearse how to lay a chest before a ruler, which piece is revealed first, where the delegation stands, and how the order of offering maps onto local hierarchies. The court's ceremonial grammar is dense. There are rules about who bows and when, the sequence of offering, and the precise phrasing that accompanies each token. An offended protocol can undo the most lavish gift. For that reason, the admiral sends trained men who know both Ming ritual and local registers. Small failures of etiquette can produce diplomatic wounds as real as any physical clash. Gifts are also promises. A porcelain set placed at an audience makes a public contract. It signals recognition, promises safe passage for merchants, offers the possibility of tribute exchange, or acknowledges a ruler's standing within a network of relations the Ming court seeks to shape. Local rulers frequently reciprocate with spices, gems, local cloth, or the services of pilots and guides, contributions that feed both commerce and intelligence. Over time, such exchanges build reciprocal ties that look like alliances, practical and fragile at once. Strategic reserve is part of the practice. Not every item is dispersed at once. Some goods are kept back for second audiences, emergencies, or particularly valuable contacts. Reserves give the admiral leverage to reward newly useful partners, to smooth a sudden diplomatic rupture, or to secure a pilot's cooperation in a treacherous channel. Eunuch clerks keep rapid inventories of dispensed items and of those held aside, mindful that imperial largesse must be visible without exhausting the treasury on immediate favors that yield little long-term return. Ceremony and spectacle shape expectations ashore. The presence of soldiers, the neat alignment of ships, the flash of polished bronze, and the unrolling of silk all amplify a gift's meaning. A well-staged embassy is a coordinated performance. Trumpets, banners, and disciplined salutes frame objects as tokens of an ordered polity. In many ports, the visual tableau speaks more quickly than language. Spectacle converts material into an immediate impression that the admiral often leverages to open negotiations and to secure audiences before the subtler work of words begins. Yet gifts are also bargaining chips. Merchants aboard the fleet watch how imperial items are distributed, noting which ports open willingly and which extract exacting fees. Local elites may press for access or demand higher returns. Harbor dues, exclusive docking rights, or monopolies on valuable commodities. Negotiation follows exchange. A ruler who receives silk may be asked to grant trading privileges or to intercede politically for Chinese merchants. The admiral's envoys must disentangle benevolence from expectation through careful phrasing and calibrated follow-up, because a mistaken implication can turn gratitude into complaint. Translation is vital and fragile. Interpreters mediate not just vocabulary, but cultural nuance. The term tribute in one language may imply subordination, while in another, it denotes mutual exchange between peers. A mistranslated phrase or a misplaced gesture can sour an audience as surely as a spoiled crate. For that reason, experienced interpreters accompany delegations. They advise on ceremony, correct gestures, and propose substitutions that preserve meaning while avoiding insult. Successful diplomacy often rests on these small, patient acts of mediation. Power and persuasion are intertwined. The fleet's gifts can be read as benevolence or as instruments of soft coercion. A carefully timed present followed by a guarded request, pilotage rights, staging privileges, or local assurances can reshape a polity's autonomy without immediate violence. The admiral practices calibrated pressure, display wealth, offer friendship, and use the visible presence of arms to suggest consequences without firing a shot. Frequently, this method achieved objectives with minimal bloodshed, but it also left ambiguous traces of obligation that later generations would interpret in different ways. Gifts and small kindnesses can create unexpected bonds. A surgeon's treatment of an injured local noble, a captain's gift of a child's toy to a grieving family, or the shared cooking of a modest meal in a modest anchorage can bind goodwill more effectively than official largesse. These human moments travel into memory and narrative, shaping impressions long after manifests are filed and after official dispatches reach the palace. Every exchange is recorded. Receipts, manifest annotations, and envoy reports are sent back to court and read by ministers who interpret them for policy. Which rulers accepted gifts readily, which demanded too much, which ports provided strategic advantage. These notes inform decisions in the palace, where to place future patrols, which merchants to favor, and where to prioritize naval presence. Diplomacy thus folds into statecraft. Objects exchanged abroad become intelligence at home. In the end, gifts are both language and leverage. They speak of who belongs to what sphere and mark a sequence of obligations that connect distant polities. The objects themselves, rolled bolts of silk, white porcelain, lacquered boxes, and sealed edicts, are humble. Their consequences, quietly accumulated, can be vast. Ahead, a harbor report arrives that will force a choice about whether to spend reserved gifts or to hold them, an early test of policy and prudence. On deck, the fleet's muscle takes visible form. Rows of men adjusting armor, pike shafts stacked like a regiment of trees, gunners checking the fit of iron shot. Soldiers aboard the treasure ships are not only a ceremonial presence, they are the fleet's immediate instrument of coercion and protection. Their presence matters in ports where the performance of strength can secure an audience, and it matters at sea where a sudden boarding or a tense negotiation can tip toward violence. The admiral balances the need for force with the risks of escalation and accident. By the early 15th century, Ming military practice had long incorporated gunpowder weapons alongside traditional arms. Hand cannons and small bombards sit alongside swivel guns mounted on rails. Matchcord and fuse coexist with bows and spears. These weapons alter the texture of shipboard conflict. A gunshot arrives with the smell of sulfur and smoke, a white flare that briefly turns night into day, and a violent recoil that demands a practiced shoulder and steady footing. The thunder of a battery bomb's bari is not merely sound. It is a signal that rewrites a port's calculus about risk and hospitality. Training adapts land drills to the rolling deck. Men practice bracing themselves against pitch and roll, learning to find a center of gravity where a single misstep can become catastrophe. Musketeers and gunners rehearse a choreography of safety and speed. Swab the barrel, measure powder, ram the shot, prime the touch hole, and fire in a cadence that preserves rate without inviting accident. Pikemen anchor long shafts against hip and knee, forming a physical hedge against boarding. Discipline matters because wood and gunpowder are a dangerous combination. Fire control and tidy stores are as essential as marksmanship. The fleet's arsenal is both practical and symbolic. Rows of cannon and swivel guns arrayed along rails are meant to be seen. They are a statement as much as a weapon. Smaller craft carry grappling hooks, boarding ladders, and chains for hasty seizure or denial. Soldiers rehearse salutes and live gunnery, where the admiral may watch cohesion and speed. That visible order, polished metal, aligned ranks, reliable drills, is a language that communicates authority to rulers and merchants alike without a word. Weapons also constrain strategy. Powder requires dryness and caution, so gunnery practice is scheduled offshore where a misfire sprays salt and pitch rather than sparks near a hold. Stowage must be ventilated and guarded. A stray ember near a magazine can destroy ship and cargo in moments. Engineers and stokers coordinate with gunners to keep fires and flammable stores strictly separated. The admiral's decision to display armament or to conceal it becomes a calculated diplomatic posture. Intimidation risks resentment. Too much deference invites predation. Soldiers perform many administrative duties aboard. They guard imperial chests, secure the line for rations, and break up fights before they grow into mutiny. On a flotilla that includes sailors, merchants, eunuch clerks, and foreign pilots, the military provides a simple language of authority, visible rank, clear commands, and immediate consequences. For men drawn from diverse social backgrounds, the soldier's badge turns the admiral's orders into something legible and enforceable. Recruitment and composition reflect pragmatic scale. Some soldiers are regular troops detached from coastal garrisons. Others are hired veterans or locally recruited levies. Specialists, artillerymen adept at casting and handling shot, engineers fluent in erecting temporary fortifications ashore, travel with them. Armor favors mobility over heavy encumbrance, lamellar and light plate that resist blade while allowing movement on an unsteady deck. Helmets are often strapped to chins to prevent loss in wind. Gauntlets are light enough to let fingers find triggers and ropes alike. Inspection aboard the flagship is at once practical and performative. The admiral expects guns to fire clean, ropes to be coiled, men to move with economy. When envoys come aboard to be reassured, drills are presented not as menace but as proof of order. A disciplined battery and a steady crew speak of a state capable of protecting commerce and of enforcing its will. At other moments, the fleet will deliberately sheathe visible arms to show peaceful intent. Placing weapons under guard as part of a theatrical disarmament that signals respect. Logistics shape martial readiness. Powder is kept dry in sealed casks or leather-wrapped kegs, locked in ventilated magazines. Shot is crated and labeled. Grapnels, chains, and boarding ladders are inventoried and kept at hand. Cross-training is routine. Sailors learn basic musketry, soldiers learn to furl sails or mend rigging when storms or casualties demand flexibility. Such overlap smooths operations when the unforgiving sea scatters duties and men must work beyond their usual roles. There is a human cost to constant readiness. Men grow used to the smell of oil and gunpowder, to waking at the clatter of a rope parting, and answering the strange rhythms of command. Stories circulate of near misses, a gunner who steadied a piece in a squall, a pike crew that repelled a boarding at dawn. These narratives become the fleet's private lore, binding soldiers into a shared identity, remembered in quiet hours and retold over bowls of rice. Late in the afternoon, as the sun gilds the hulls and the decks warm, a lookout calls from the masthead. At first, the shout is small, a signal flag from a boat approaching with colors the admiral does not recognize. Hands tighten on shafts and triggers. Men freeze mid-motion. The day's rehearsals condense into a single instant of decision, whether to show the fleet's teeth or to open arms in hospitality. The morning for farewells arrives with a strange quiet, and as if the quay itself leans in to listen. Families who have accompanied men this far, wives, sons, aging parents, gather at the edges of the crowd, clutching bundles and small tokens. Some wear clothing pressed and plain. Others come in their best, the way people mark a threshold of absence. There is no single model of departure. Some men will be gone for months, others for years, and some families will never see their kin again. The knowledge of such possibilities settles like a private weight. Letters are written at a small table beneath an awning, where inkpots cluster and scribes move with steady hands. Paper is costly enough that every line matters. A man drafting a note thinks in measured phrases. Letters take many forms: a soldier's brief scrawl promising to return, a craftsman's list of debts and instructions for payment, an older wife's careful accounting of household tasks, or a clerk's formal communication folded and sealed for the magistrate. Some letters are intimate and unvarnished in their grief or humor. Others are composed for practical audiences and therefore built with the care of law. Sealing a letter is a small theatrical act. Wax is warmed and dropped in a steady bead. A signet is pressed and leaves its unmistakable crease. The impression promises identity and gives a family something they can point to in the event of absence. Men tuck letters into oilcloth, wrap them with twine, and hand them to a runner who will hold them at a merchant shop or lodge them with a local official, practical measures that might one day secure pay or property for those left ashore. Gifts circulate with the letters, each item a compact vocabulary of care: a comb, a length of cloth, a purse of coin. These objects replace words when words will not suffice. Some gifts are meant to soothe: a carved amulet for a child, a strip of embroidered cloth for a wife who will sew to keep the household whole. When an admiral or a senior officer bestows a token, perhaps a piece of official brocade or a small embroidered square, it carries status as well as goodwill. Such items can ease the burden of absence by providing visible proof of rank and care. Speech and silence mix in farewells. Some men speak for money to be collected, for faces to be remembered, for duties to be kept. Others leave without a word, gripping a rope with a kind of practical courage because language would fracture the moment. Laughter sometimes bubbles up, an attempt to make absence feel temporary. Other times grief is a low, unmoving current. Children cling to skirts and then run to the ship's rail to fling a final wave when the rowers push off. Religious rites thread through the partings. The fleet is a plural world. Buddhist monks chant short sutras near the holds. Taoist ritualists sweep incense before a piece of wood set aside as a household altar. Muslim sailors whisper prayers that call for steady winds and safe harbors. These rituals serve private faith and public reassurance alike, an assertion that the absent belong to a community under the watch of gods and ancestors, not simply to the indifferent sea. Bureaucracy keeps pace with emotion. Clerks make final checks. Wages disbursed, rolls signed, personal effects inventoried. Captains initial lists and note the names of men who are ill or delayed. Merchants confirm which chests remain on quay versus which ride the flagship. These records are small legal bulwarks for families whose livelihoods depend on accurate ledger keeping. The mingling of ritual and ledger demonstrates how a state's outward theater is often matched by the simple demand of verification. Private acts of trust occur in shadowed corners. A sailor slips a sealed petition to a trusted captain. A widow arranges for a distant cousin to be notified if a husband does not return. These confidences are intimate and necessary, human logistics that formal manifest cannot cover. They are a testament to the social scaffolding upon which voyages rest, networks of patronage, neighborhood ties, and long-standing credit lines that will be called upon in a man's absence. As the day slides toward afternoon, the sheriff's bell tugs the air and men prepare to move. Boats begin to cast off, oars dip and lift in a steady, metallic rhythm. The towing vessels, small and unspectacular, pull at the larger hulls with a patience that mirrors the engines of state, quiet work that makes spectacle possible. A child runs along the bank until the wake separates him from the boat. He stands on the quay, waving a scrap of cloth long after the flotilla fades. There is a compact moment when a husband turns for the last time and counts the faces he can hold in memory. A woman presses a wrapped letter to her chest and steps back into a life reorganized around absence. A father watches as his son climbs a gangway and imagines him older and weathered. The scene contains 1,000 small benedictions, a hand laid on a prow, a whispered name, a breadcrumb of advice. Each is an offering one can carry across water. Even as oars begin to pull and the hulls move outward, the quay exerts a final gravity. An old mariner walks the planks and lays a palm to the bow of a small junk, making the sign of the cross or muttering a phrase in a hushed tone. Ritual not for any court, but for muscle memory and luck. The fleet answers with a collective draw. Sails are checked one last time, flags run up, and a pilot calls bearings. The city recedes, voice by voice. The river parts around the keel and closes like a memory. At the edge of the quay, a sealed chest remains to be accounted for. An item mislaid, a last-minute gift whose rightful owner is not present. Clerks argue quietly, then set a notation. It is a small administrative hesitation, but in the life of a voyage, such hesitations can open into questions whose answers only distant shores will provide. Dawn keeps a soft, uncertain light when the fleet's last rituals begin. The quay takes on a hush like cloth drawn over sound. Work pauses in many places, not because hands cannot move, but because words must be uttered, charms must be tied, incense must curl. For men about to leave land for long stretches of water, ritual organizes anxiety into action. It provides a grammar for hope and a method for making the unknown speakable. There are layers to what happens. The court's formal rites, brief and exacting, are one layer. Before any grand voyage, the Yongle court would dispatch formal prayers and offerings in the capital, sacrifices to heaven, petitions at ancestral altars, and commands to temple custodians to ensure cosmic favor for imperial enterprise. Those acts, cited in the palace and temple precincts, send sanction downward. The fleet departs bearing not only manifests and seals, but also the imprimatur of ritual legitimacy. On the quay, however, a different, more improvisational set of observances takes shape, local and personal rites that reflect the fleet's human makeup. On some ships, Buddhist monks move among the crew. Where a monk's presence is recorded in chronicles, sometimes in passing, more often implied by the performance of sutras, their role is practical, chanting for protection, reciting names before a possible death, binding talismans in sailors' clothing. Sutraries, short invocations against storm and sickness, are intoned with a steady, almost metronomic cadence that calms those who listen. The sound of a chant is not the same as certainty, but it steadies hands and attention in a way that grease and rope do not. Pilots and common sailors more often turn to coastal deities. Mazu, also called Tianhu, the Queen of Heaven, is a presence on many Chinese seafaring voyages long before after Zheng He's time. Offerings of incense, small paper models, and the lighting of lamps in a quick, reverent shrine are typical. A sailor might slip a coin into a wooden box before a small carved figure and murmur a plea for calm seas and clear channels. These acts are intimate and immediate. Sailors make bargains with gods they believe watch local currents and reefs, and those bargains are rooted in the experience of many small rescues and storms survived. Zheng He's own faith brings another register. Born Ma He in Yunnan and raised in the Islamic tradition, the admiral's life bridges worlds. He is a man with mosque-going memory, even as he works daily within an imperial household steeped in Confucian ceremony. On the flagship, you might hear a short solemn prayer called by a man who follows Muhammad's teachings. Leather-bound copies of Quranic verses travel in a chest like other valued instruments. To call Zheng He a syncretic leader, one able to carry Muslim practice alongside Chinese ritual, captures something many sources imply. The fleet is plural by necessity. Its rituals accommodate difference because cohesion depends on it. Ritual objects are small and purposeful. A palm-sized wooden plaque bears a family name and a promise. A length of cloth is knotted into a talisman and sewn under a man's tunic. A merchant tucks a small packet of camphor and herbs into a trunk to guard cloth from mildew and to stand as a spiritual ward. These objects are the pragmatic mysticism of sailors. They protect both cargo and flesh. Even court clerks, practical men of ink and ledger, sometimes pause to touch a charm before sealing a chest. An unconscious acknowledgement that paperwork and talisman share the task of survival. The imperial and the humble meet in certain public acts. A minister or eunuch may walk the flagship's deck and perform a brief libation, pouring wine to the sea or tying a ribbon to a mast, which can be read both as an offering and as a public show of commitment. When the fleet will host envoys or trade partners soon after arrival, such ceremonials are doubled. They serve to sanctify the voyage and to make visible to insiders and outsiders alike that the Empire takes this movement seriously. Pilots and helmsmen hold their own quiet rites. Before their watch begins, a pilot may test a small compass, feel the grain of a knot, and murmur a short private invocation. Some touch a scar on their hand where an old fall left a mark. Others make the sign of a small cross or fold fingers in a brief gesture that borrows from multiple faiths. These rituals are not extravagant. They are tiny calibrations of courage. They prepare a person to act under pressure and to accept the randomness of sea weather with a steadier heart. Ritual also mediates hierarchy. Eunuchs and court officials insist on certain forms that assert the emperor's presence even in the absence of the sovereign. They arrange that gifts be blessed in a manner suitable for diplomatic exchange. A chest of silk, for instance, may be presented before a shrine to render its donation auspicious. The way an offering is wrapped and spoken over matters in foreign ports, where local courts will interpret the gesture. Ritual thus functions as a language the empire believes other polities can read. There is an audible edge to the prayers, too. As ceremonies finish and incense dwindles to white threads, the crowd often breaks into soft sobs, a laugh that curdles into silence, or a shout cut off by the rush of an officer's order. These sounds are small detonations of real fear and real hope. The unanimity of such moments, hands joined, eyes closed, a small child pressed to a mother's side, creates a sense of shared fate. It is the human glue of a venture that otherwise looks like statecraft and seamanship. As the last rites fold, a ritual action remains that bridges the quotidian and the cosmic, the casting off. The pilot throws a coin into the water for good luck, or the admiral dips a hand into the river and touches the ship's prow. Such gestures are both symbolic and functional. They mark an intention and also signal to the crew that ritual has ended and work begins. The shift is palpable. Faces that had been turned inward now square toward the horizon. Hands that had folded in prayer find the rope again. But ritual does not dispel contingency. A pilot's last report hints at a wind shift. A clerk notices a parcel unstowed. A tide runs higher than expected. As the fleet tightens its lines and prepares to slip free, the rituals leave a residue, comfort, focus, small vows that will be tested by weather and diplomacy in the days to come. The river and the sea speak through water and time. On the morning of departure, the pilot becomes the fleet's most consequential voice. Not the admiral's seal, but the helmsman's call about current and tide. Pilots read charts and memory alike. They measure depth with a lead line that speaks in soft thuds and whispered numbers. Their craft is tactile, a knotted cord, a leather hand, a practiced eye. The pilot's knowledge is local, where sandbars lurk, how eddies spin off a headland, which channel will take a deep-laden treasure ship without scraping its keel. At the quay, pilots come forward with quiet authority. Some are court pilots who have served imperial expeditions before. Others are local men whose knowledge of river mouths and shoals is the product of lifelong attention. Their reports to the admiral are direct. Tide tables recalled not from ink, but from felt memory. The hour a flood slackens, the minute when a channel will widen, the day when a neap tide will make passage too shallow. These are not abstract calculations. They are bodily archives held in calloused hands and in the timing of breath. Tide is an element of constraint and grace. In the Yangtze estuary, tidal currents can be strong and capricious. A favorable flood can help a heavy fleet clear shallows, while a countering ebb can strand a hull or bite into a keel. Pilots negotiate with tides as if with parties. Offer the right word, catch the right swell, and the water will carry you. Mistake the time, and the labor and expense of unmooring can become entrapment. The admiral must arbitrate between the court's timetable and the pilot's counsel. Often prudence wins because ships cannot be hurried past physics. Lead lines are instruments and epigraphs. A sailor drops a weighted line into a channel and feels the seabed in the fingers at its end. Soft silt, coarser sand, rock. Each thump is translated into fathoms and then into decisions. Lighten the load, hold fast, heave to. Pilots listen like readers to this low drumbeat and translate it into orders. When convoys move in company, a pilot's call ripples across decks. Sound 2 fathoms, starboard, stay, and ease the larboard bow. The voice is precise because hesitation can cost a hull. The tide also shapes social ritual. Before a critical passage, a pilot may walk the deck with a small bottle of water from a local shrine or an oil-soaked talisman and pass it among those who will take the bow. Offerings are made quietly to river spirits. Coins may be left in shallow pools where currents meet. Gestures of reciprocity to a power the state cannot command. These acts are an admission. Knowledge is not mastery. One must still propitiate forces that lie outside imperial parchment. Practical preparations respond to tide as well. Lines are secured with slack ready to be taken in or paid out. Anchors are readied with scopes adjusted for the expected depth. And small boats are kept standing off to sound leads and probe unknown channels. When a flood is predicted, lighter vessels are used to tow the larger, their crews ready to adjust for sudden squalls that ride the tide. The admiral must ensure contingency. Extra caulkers and carpenters, spare anchors, and teams ready to man pumps. A tide is a moving deadline. It offers opportunity and imposes penalty. Communication between pilot and admiral is a performance of mutual respect. The admiral must accept, publicly, the pilot's local knowledge while retaining authority for the fleet. This is delicate political choreography. A pilot's expertise can supersede imperial timetable in practice, but the court's expectations demand visible deference. Zheng He's skill lay partly in this balance. He drew on pilots' knowledge while shaping decisions that preserved the court's dignity. In private, he might ask a pilot about a shoal's temperament. In public, he thanked him and then acted on counsel. A tide's mood can change quickly. Clouds offshore may thicken, wind freshen, and the surface swell with whispering currents that reverse a favored channel. When that happens, the pilot's authority intensifies into urgency. Orders fly, sail reductions, oar changes, crowding the tillers, and men respond with trained speed. The soundscape shifts from conversation to urgent commands. Blocks screech, capstans turn, voices cut through the wind. It is strain made visible, an embodied rehearsal for crisis. The pilot's final test is the harbor mouth itself. Channels that seem generous on paper narrow with silt and shifting bars. Currents eddy around exposed rocks unseen until the hull begins to feel their pull. A pilot times the fleet's approach to match a rising tide when possible, using the incoming flood to lift the keel over stubborn shoals. Even so, maneuvering a flotilla of heavily laden ships demands patience and coordination. Lead ships probe ahead, signals are hoisted to indicate a safe lane, and tugs assist when the water's temper requires mechanical aid. When the flagship finally moves, the pilot rides near the bow, eyes fixed, hands steady. He calls a low measured cadence to the helms and to the towing boats. Men watch the water at the ship's flank and feel the currents shove. For an instant, the quay and the fleet are in counterpoint. The city's static order and the sea's mobile rule. Then the convoy slips beyond the first shoal, and a small cheer rises, brief and brittle as foam. The pilot exhales, not because triumph is won, but because the immediate peril passed. But the fleet's course has only just begun. Beyond the estuary, the ocean's tides are governed by larger seasons, and the pilot's local knowledge thins into broader navigation, where different pilots and new charts will matter. The current victory, passage through the mouth, reveals a horizon with new uncertainties. How long will the voyage to the first anchorage take? Are the monsoon winds already shifting? Is the first foreign harbor prepared to receive the court's gifts? The pilot's role recedes into that of one of many guides, and other judgments, political, navigational, meteorological, will soon demand answers. The moment of true departure is not a single instant but a series of small commencements. Sails that had hung like patient wings are checked once more. Halyards creak as men take up slack. The flagship sounds a low bell that gathers the convoy's attention, like a conductor raising his hand. You feel the ship lean into leaving, as if the wood remembers another harbor and now learns the taste of open water. The admiral stands near the binnacle, his silhouette narrow and practiced. And for a moment, the world narrows to rope, plank, and sky. Signals are precise and ritualized. Flags, squares of silk, each with a pattern, are hoisted in a syntax the fleet understands. One flag commands towboats to cast off. Another orders scouts to weigh anchor and take the lead. A sequence of pennants will mark formation once the open channel is reached. The admiral's hand is steady because he must be. He cannot micromanage every hull, but he must shape the pattern of departure so the fleet moves as a single body. Wind reads differently now, a gentle easterly that will favor the first leg. Not a gale, but an encouragement. Men sense the change. A helmsman traces the horizon with a practiced eye and notes how flags twitch. Pilots have plotted a line that avoids known shoals, and lead ships, lighter junks and scouting vessels, edge ahead, their bows cutting the water like a question. Behind them, the heavier treasure ships begin to gather momentum, their keels murmuring as they answer the tide. The technical demands are exacting. Towing boats pull the largest hulls clear of shallows on a measured cadence. Oars dip in unison, and the mass of the fleet glides as if guided by one hand. Sail trimmers watch shrouds. Carpenters stand ready with mallets. Gunners keep match and sponge at hand. Yards are trimmed, sails fill, and men shout orders that must cut through wind and timber. In those shouts, short, practiced, lies the discipline of survival. There is palpable tension, an awareness that the court's expectations ride on the accuracy of this first course. The fleet carries not merely silk and silver, but the legitimacy of an empire. An error early on, a grounding, a misread tide, could force an unplanned halt or expose the convoy when diplomacy should be its shield. The admiral's orders blend prudence with resolve, to move with purpose, to keep gifts intact, and to press no farther than the sea allows. Scouts send quick reports, a change in the swell, a pod of dolphins that suggests deep water, and, more importantly, an unfamiliar sail on the horizon whose colors the admiral does not recognize at first. Interpreters are summoned. A watch is posted to follow the unknown sail. It might be a local trader, a fishing vessel, or a ship from a neighboring court. Each possibility carries consequences. For a moment, seamanship meets contingency. An encounter might become trade, a request, or the first test of command. Beyond immediate logistics, the admiral thinks in lines of days and seasons. He plans the first anchorage, a sheltered bay for fresh water and hull inspections, computes daily distance under favorable winds, and staggers arrivals so a small part is not overwhelmed. Such planning is humble. A map is a guide, not a promise, and charts must be tested against people and weather. He also considers envoys and merchants aboard, whose bargaining schedules depend on timely arrival. As sails unfurl and decks fill with motion, the city recedes. The quay's cries thin into gulls and distant calls. Men who a little while earlier adjusted seals now stand at the rail and chart land into memory. Practical thoughts fill heads. Watch rotations, stoker shifts, ration schedules. Once the sea takes a crew, routine becomes the governance of sanity. For hours, the fleet moves like a long animal, each ship a vertebra in a careful spine. Scouts report soundings, pilots murmur to helmsmen, carpenters check fastenings. The first night, lanterns are kept low to avoid signaling unknown watchers. Sentries tighten their calls. Sleep is rationed. Even officers nap in harness, prepared to spring at a cry from aloft. The camaraderie of drills and shared chores binds men into a temporary family whose cohesion is the voyage's first safeguard. The fleet's second morning brings a test. A squall bulks on the horizon, a compact, fast-moving column of rain and wind that can bend spars and surprise unwary sails. Clouds in these seas are signs pilots have long learned to read. The admiral's hand hesitates. Press on for an extra league to gain distance, or shorten sail and ride the squall's edge. He chooses caution. Sail is shortened. The fleet tightens, and scouts run ahead to test the margins. The squall arrives with a sudden roar, rain that slants like thin needles and hammers against the planks. When the rain clears, the fleet finds itself farther from home and closer to the ocean's larger rules. The admiral pores over reports and marks a thin correction to the chart. He knows the first course is set, but never final. The sea will demand daily revisions. Ahead lies passage to larger waters, courts where emperors and sultans will judge the Ming's offerings, and coasts where language and custom matter as much as cannon and silk. The admiral signs the day's log and looks to the horizon where, beyond the squall, a faint column of smoke rises on a distant point of land, too small to be certain, but enough to register in a man trained to read the ocean's signals. For now, it is a detail. Soon, it may be where the fleet's first anchorage is chosen, or where unexpected business alters plans. The choice will be his, to anchor early and seek local intelligence, or to press on and test the course he has set against unknown shores. The ocean reconfigures a convoy into a single moving organism. Days after the last quay slips from view, the fleet adopts a rhythm so regular it feels like a language. Watch reliefs mark time as surely as bells, the creak of blocks and the snap of halyards punctuate speech, and meals follow a cadence that keeps men human while the horizon eats distance. On the flagship, the admiral's voice threads through these measures, turning many vessels into a single will. The treasure ships ride the swell with a heavy, patient dignity. Their sides heave slowly, their decks tilt in long arcs that teach every body to find new centers of balance. Between them, the smaller junks dart and bob, scouting ahead and returning with quick reports. A sandbank sounded, a favorable current found, a shoal of flying fish. Formation is the fleet's first defense here, mutual sight and mutual shelter, but it must not become rigidity. Scouts must be free to run channels. Supply vessels must be able to peel off when water or timber is needed. Daily life at sea is practical and intimate. Morning sees rigging checked and canvas mended. Midday is for stores and small repairs. Afternoons bring gunnery practice or knot drills. Evenings are low-lit hours when men mend nets, tell stories, and trade small comforts. Lantern light moves like handwriting across the decks. In this economy of sight and sound, the fleet avoids collisions and keeps course where the compass and the stars allow. Diplomacy becomes a practiced craft on board. Officers rehearse how to present silk and porcelain, how to arrange a small chest so it reads as respectful without flaunting wealth, and how to bow and speak in ways that reach foreign courts. Interpreters refine phrases across Malay, Arabic, and regional loanwords so meaning travels with minimal rift. Presentation matters. A badly chosen gift or a clumsy ritual can unravel an hour of negotiation as surely as a storm can unravel rigging. The admiral attends to weather and to men with equal care. He reads pilots' reports and checks the subtle changes in swell that might foreshadow a shift in the monsoon. He watches the small patterns of illness, a cough in the hold, a listless face during the night watch. On larger vessels, dedicated watchmen note scurvy's early signs, track fevers, and ensure the surgeon's small stores of herbs and poultices are used sparingly and well. For the crew, modest comforts matter. Tea taken in a small iron cup, a warmed scrap of cloth, a private bowl of soup, that steady spirits between ports. Contact with coasts begins cautiously. Scouts make furtive landings on small isles to barter for fresh water and fruit, returning with eggs and greens that become immediate relief to store-bound provisions. Where a friendly anchorage is known, the admiral sends a small detachment under a trusted officer to trade for timber, water, and local produce. These exchanges are practical and diagnostic. Merchants examine taste and weave, informants pass word of other fleets, and local pilots supply precise knowledge of channels and currents that the admiral folds into his plans. The fleet's presence is itself a form of argument. Where the Ming flag flies and guns are arrayed, smaller polities often see advantage in ritual and protection. The admiral therefore tempers display with diplomacy. He might land a modest envoy bearing a carefully composed gift to test reception before calling for a formal audience. He will read the posture of local courts, alliances, rivalries, and internal disputes before committing to a schedule. Learning to read custom and mood is as important as charting a safe channel. Ambiguity tests command as often as weather does. Unfamiliar sails on the horizon present choices. A neutral trader, a potentially hostile flotilla, or an emissary vessel with its own agenda. The admiral prefers a ritual-first approach, gifts and polite inquiry, reserving force for when diplomacy fails or when a key must be secured to protect merchants. Yet the mere possibility of cannon and musket alters negotiations. A disciplined show of arms can clear a route without bloodshed, but it also risks offense and hardening local attitudes. Sickness and fatigue are constant companions. Even with careful provisioning and early stops for fresh produce, long voyages strain bodies. Surgeons isolate fevered men, treat wounds with poultices and cauterization when necessary, and keep records of ailments to inform later care. The admiral's log records not only navigation and gift lists, but also casualties, illnesses, and remedial measures, data the court will later use to judge the expedition's cost and success. Kindness is matter. A steward who shares a warm bowl, a captain who visits the sick, or an officer who arranges a short, morale-boosting ceremony can steady a crew that might otherwise fray. At night, the fleet's domestic life reveals itself. Dinghies slide between hulls under muted lanterns. Confidences pass from captain to captain. A pilot's face is memorized as a possible future ally. Songs and jokes stitch the long hours into something bearable. The fleet's culture becomes ballast when the sea presses. Weeks into open water, scouts return with a troubling report. A compact cluster of sails to the southwest. Too organized to be mere traders and too numerous to be harmless. The admiral summons his captains. Interpreters check vocabularies and possible idioms. Gunners prime swivel guns and ensure matches are ready. Pilots sketch tactical formations on a chart table and mark wind angles and probable maneuvers. The unknown cluster is not yet identified, but it will test seamanship, diplomacy, and the limits of patience. A choice waits on the admiral's brow: approach with gifts and lowered flags, or march the fleet in a posture of visible force and demand recognition. Either pathway contains risk. The ocean, which had seemed a teacher of technique and rhythm, now offers an ambiguous encounter that will press human judgment hard. The first sign is always a line, an ink-dark smudge that becomes a sail, a mast, then a proper hull resolved against the light. Encounters at sea are theatrical in their slow reveal. The distance tightens, the language of flags and oars begins, and the fleet's disciplined choreography turns toward response. Scouts run forward to identify the stranger. Interpreters dust off vocabularies. Captains shoulder into positions that will either welcome or repel what comes near. Not all meetings are meant to be tests. Much of the fleet's diplomacy reads like commerce. Small outlying junks slide alongside to trade fresh fruit and water. A few canoes bring fish, and a trader offers news of markets where silk will fetch a ready price. These encounters are practical and immediate. Barter for food or a pilot who knows a hidden channel, and the admiral treats them as intelligence as much as supply. A basket of sour fruit exchanged for a crate of rice can lift morale for a week. A pilot's confident report of a safe creak can save days of dangerous probing. In those small transactions, the fleet learns the texture of the sea's human geography. But other sails carry states. The Indian Ocean is crowded with polities of varying size and temperament. Sultanates, merchant coalitions, and coastal chiefs whose authority is local and specific. When a ship that flies unfamiliar colors approaches, the admiral must read posture and decide the tone of engagement. Is this a coastal ruler arriving with ceremonial expectation, an armed privateer seeking profit, or a rival fleet performing its own projection of power? The answer is rarely obvious at first. Zheng He's flotilla had advantages. The treasure ships mounted a visible array of silk and lacquer, a compact court under canvas. Their size impressed, and the presence of a well-organized military complement signaled both capacity for force and for protection of trade. Yet, spectacle alone is insufficient. Diplomacy requires translation, the ability to present gifts in ways that local courts will understand, to speak through interpreters whose registers match local custom, and to respect ceremonial hierarchies that often differ sharply from the Ming court's rituals. The admiral prefers ritual and gifts as probes. A small delegation, bearing cases of porcelain and bolts of silk, will be lowered into a local boat and guided ashore with measured steps. In ports where precedent matters, Southeast Asian courts, trading emporia along India's coasts, the way one bends the knee or the order in which gifts are offered can make negotiations smooth or ruinous. Interpreters stand at the edge of the quay, whispering alternative phrases. Captains watch for the tilt of a ruler's chin, for offerings returned in an order that signals hierarchy. These are not trivial gestures. They are the grammar by which a foreign audience reads respect and intent. Sometimes language is enough to open doors. At other times, farce is a necessary punctuation. A flotilla of armed pirates or a local lord refusing to honor a treaty can be met with a calibrated show of arms. Guns run, small landing parties prepared, and officers sent with clear, uncompromising demands. The aim is often not to kill, but to reassert the language of power, an equivocal script where the demonstration of capability ends bloodshed because it makes resistance appear futile. Yet force always carries cost: wounds, damaged cargo, and the diplomatic aftershock that a heavy hand can leave in an anxious port. Encounters also test intelligence networks. Scouts bring rumors, rival fleets, local famines, plots against foreign traders. Merchants ask after tax rates and safe harbors. The admiral convenes a small council. Pilots sketch coasts, interpreters parse dialect nuance. Eunuchs relay courtly expectations, and merchants offer economic calculus. Decisions fold together practical risk and long-range benefit. Will a stop promise trade that outweighs the hazards of an ill-favored harbor? The fleet cannot be greedy. Each landing draws down stores and risks men. The admiral must weight immediate need against strategic consequence. Humanity permeates these meetings. A merchant who lost his cargo in a storm might beg for shelter. An injured sailor from a small coastal boat elicits a surgeon's care aboard the admiral's ship. Gifts change hands, and, with them, stories. A child's wooden toy given to a captain can become a token exchanged for safe passage later. A shared meal can press the stranger into an ally. Small kindnesses create webs of reciprocity that long outlast formal treaties. These are the grain-level transactions that make the fleet's high policy possible. There are moments when an encounter becomes a hinge. A harbor that once welcomed trade might now be under a new ruler suspicious of outsiders. A city famed for spices might be embroiled in factional quarrels that make anchorage dangerous. In such cases, the admiral's judgment is crucial. He weighs the safety of men and cargo, the obligation to the emperor's gift-carrying mission, and the strategic value of establishing a presence. His choices will be recorded and sent back to court as assessments, reports that may shape future policy and the empire's understanding of distant seas. Not every contact is resolved at sea. Envoys are sometimes invited ashore for parley under guarded truce. Private negotiations unfold behind curtained pavilions in a ruling house. The admiral may send a trusted officer to fetch local knowledge or secure a temporary anchorage, while scouts perform careful reconnaissance. Each shore meeting alters the fleet's course and reputation. A successful negotiation brings trade and tribute. A mishandled audience sours future ports and complicates return routes. As the fleet slips along coasts and across open waters, one particular sighting tightens the admiral's mind. A distant harbor where towers and banners show a polity as yet untried by the Ming's ceremonial scripts. Pilots do not know the currents there well, and the interpreters lack shared vocabulary. The admiral must decide: send a small embassy ashore and risk the unknown, or hold the fleet back and forfeit a chance to secure a valuable anchorage. The decision will be made at first light. The ocean keeps its own calendar, and some of its days arrive like a verdict rather than weather. For a fleet built to carry silk and ceremony across long routes, storms are the blunt arithmetic of risk. They test seams and courage. They unmake carefully counted inventories, and they reveal the brittle points in a supply chain that otherwise looks formidable from shore. Storms come in types sailors learn to name: sudden squalls that ride like a fist across the deck, broad monsoon bursts that reshape a month's passage, and compact cyclonic winds that can tear rigging from a mast. The first sign is often a subtle rearrangement: clouds hardening at an odd angle, birds flying inland with urgent direction, a sudden change in swell. Pilots shout warnings, men lash hatches, and the ship's rhythm tightens to a survival cadence. Water is both ally and enemy. Heavy rain can replenish barrels, but also saturate cargo and rot hides meant to keep powder dry. Salt spray works at seams until a previously tight joint drinks in. Carpenters and caulkers stand ready with pitch and hemp. Their work is constant maintenance made urgent by weather. At night, a storm's voice is a compound sound: wind singing through shrouds, timbers groaning, and belts of rain that batter lanterns out of reach, while men learn to breathe with the hull. The cost of a storm is measured in broken spars, lost cargo, and lost days. A sprung mast or a holed hull forces a detour to the nearest friendly anchorage, if one is available, and that diversion consumes stores, time, and patience. Fresh water runs low, salted meat must stretch farther, morale frays as the sense of forward motion dissolves. Stores bought painstakingly at home cannot be conjured at sea. The fleet's ledger becomes a map of vulnerability. Supply breakdowns creep quietly. A miscounted barrel, an early open chest, or a damp patch in a hold widen into shortages. Quartermasters keep ledgers, but ledgers depend on honest hands. Theft, error, and ration creep create pressure points where disputes flare. Officers watch for pilfering and hold inspections, but policing consumes energy the fleet cannot afford. Illness follows scarcity. The topic of scurvy in Ming naval practice is debated. Some historians argue Chinese fleets reduced deficiency illness by stopping for fresh greens and carrying pickled vegetables. Others note that long voyages still allowed fevers and dysentery to spread. Surgeons and apothecaries do what they can: poultices, herbal decoctions, and diet adjustments. Preventive measures, rainwater capture, rotated casks, and short forays to barter for fruit are routine, but they cannot eliminate contagion. Human strain is equally dangerous. Mutiny in the dramatic sense was uncommon, but quiet erosions of discipline were frequent. Absenteeism from watch, petty thefts, desertions at the first hospitable shore. Long voyages thin patience. Small slights swell into grudges and old debts become urgent claims. Leaders who address these fractures with fairness, visible concern, and timely reward repair the social fabric. Those who dismiss them find the fleet brittle. The fleet's workshops are critical infrastructure. Carpenters splice new shrouds, caulkers reseal seams in driving rain, and blacksmiths refashion fittings and mend anchor chains. Skilled artisans aboard, men who can fashion repairs from limited timber, iron, and rope, turn breakage into survivable adaptation. Stores of spare wood, rope, and metal are the expedition's insurance. Their preservation is a strategic priority. Logistics demand diplomatic flexibility. Friendly ports can trade timber and vegetables for porcelain or silk. Trading towns may demand a toll or ceremonial exchange. The admiral must weigh immediate survival against imperial thrift. A chest of fine cloth traded for fresh water might save lives, but will be recorded in the court's accounts. Zheng He's expeditions show the court accepted significant expenditure in return for secure maritime networks. Yet, each outlay was also a political choice. Small rituals keep the fleet humane. Officers schedule music and storytelling. Captains allow a festival meal when a friendly shore yields a harvest. Surgeons share medicine not only to heal, but to comfort. These acts are tactical kindnesses, simple measures that preserve morale and make men willing to face another day at sea. After weeks of difficult sailing, a lookout's cry breaks the routine. The convoy's designated supply junk limps on the horizon with its foremast snapped and a jury-rigged spar. The vessel's reduced speed and compromised stores immediately sharpen calculations. Without its extra rice and tools, the fleet's projected schedule shifts. Ration plans must be revised. A smaller margin of error replaces the earlier cushion of caution. The admiral's choice is concrete and human. Detach a pair of lighter junks to tow the crippled supply ally vessel into the inlet under escort, accepting a temporary thinning of protection, or order strict rationing and press on, hoping makeshift repairs hold. He consults eunuch clerks about which chests can be spared, asks surgeons how long remedies and bandages will last, and listens as pilots plot a tow line that will work with the tide. Men prepare splints for broken spars, fashion canvas sleeves to cap leaks, and tighten watches to conserve labor. Whatever the admiral decides will be written into the log and judged back in the capital, the costs tallied, the choices weighed for prudence or recklessness. For now, there is no time for debates that belong to courtiers. The day narrows to the practical problem at hand. Keep men fed, ships mended, and the imperial mission intact. The decision will bind the fleet's course for weeks to come, and it will also test whether imperial resolve and human compassion can be balanced when survival and honor tug in opposite directions. The return is less a single day than a season of unmaking. Anchors dropped, sails furled, men stepping onto familiar planks with the slow, disbelieving gait of people who have lived for months in motion. Ships that once felt like mobile cities lessen their bulk in the eye by degrees. Paint flakes from the rails, canvas is patched, and the smell of distant ports, spices, smoke, dried fish, hangs stubbornly in the timbers. When the convoy finally rounds a headland, and the first familiar roofs come into view, the human response is complex, relief braided with a strange aftertaste of estrangement. Men who have been shaped by salt find the quay too small for their new memories. Reports are delivered in layers. Pilots and captains write logs that translate weather and soundings into numbers the court can read. Merchants tally profits and losses in the quiet arithmetic of trade. Eunuch clerks present manifests that show gifts exchanged and tributes received. Interpreters and envoys come ashore with dispatches in many languages. The palace receives exotic reports that read like travelogues, accounts of distant courts, of spices and gemstones, of political configurations whose outlines the emperor had not known. Practicalities follow. Cargo is tallied, chests unfastened, and the ceremonial portion of the voyage is staged for a capital eager to absorb its news. The imperial reception is itself a ritual of translation. Envoys bearing tribute are paraded, gifts are unpacked, and exotic animals, strange beasts that travel like moving proofs of distant lands, are led into palace courtyards. Chroniclers record stories that sound half miracle. A camel trudging like patience incarnate, a giraffe whose grace the court called a quilin, a bird with unfamiliar calls. Such objects and creatures become symbolic tools. They convert distance into palpable wonder, and the emperor's reach into a visible index. The court catalogs these things not merely for spectacle, but as evidence that the Ming sphere of influence is real, and that the sea can be harnessed to display it. Diplomacy converts into long-term consequence. The fleet's exchanges produce tributary ties and open commercial corridors. Ports from Sumatra to the Swahili coast sent envoys and trade missions. Merchants discovered predictable safety for their routes, and a network of maritime intelligence, pilots with localized knowledge, merchants who served as informants, and eunuchs who lodged reports, grew into an archive the court could draw upon. The Ming state learned that naval presence could be an instrument of both generosity and order. Silk and porcelain lubricated alliances, discipline and cannon supported bargaining. Yet legacy is not purely triumphant. The voyage's costs were enormous. Ships, crews, gifts, and logistics competed with other imperial expenditures. After the Yongle Emperor, court priorities shifted. Political rivals, a resurgent Confucian bureaucratic class, skeptical of extravagant maritime projects, and domestic pressures reoriented funds inward. The state's projection onto the Indian Ocean did not vanish overnight, but the intensity of direct support declined. Later, Ming policy favored coastal restrictions and a narrowing of official maritime scope. Private trade persisted, often creative and resilient, but the official fleet's scale and frequency diminished. Historians debate these causes: court politics, fiscal strain, ideological shifts, but the result is visible. The era of sustained state-led treasure voyages waned. Material traces complicate the story. Archaeological finds, occasional ship timbers, and port records give us fragments, evidence of shipbuilding know-how, of material exchange, and of contacts across oceans. Yet many specifics remain unsettled. The exact dimensions of the largest treasure ships, for instance, are disputed. Contemporary accounts sometimes exaggerate, and later chronicles compress memory into myth. Some timbers were likely repurposed in local docks. Some vessels may have been lost to storms or scuttled, and others retired to less glamorous duties. The sea keeps secrets in wreck and drift. The human legacy is quieter but perhaps more profound. Men who sailed carried back more than cargo: knowledge of winds, of currents, of foreign languages, and diplomatic practice, diffused into broader maritime culture. Pilots who learned new channels taught others. Merchants who found markets brought new commodities into circulation. Craftsmen who saw foreign techniques adapted small innovations into local workshops. The voyages were a vector for exchange that outlived any single fleet. Culinary ideas, textile tastes, and navigational tips circulated in taverns and workshops as well as in palace halls. Memory matters. At court, the voyages became chapters in official history that argued for an emperor's grandeur. In port cities, they became local legend. Stories told to children about the day, strange sails darkened the horizon, and foreign tongues answered the key. In distant polities, memories of Ming largesse could shape a ruler's posture toward China for generations. And in the ocean itself, the pattern of trade and diplomacy, routes marked by pilot knowledge and mutual recognition, persisted even where imperial banners no longer led the way. There is an ethical residue to admit. The fleets carried power and generosity, but they also projected a hierarchy that could override local autonomy. Gifts could charm, but display could intimidate. The admiral's role, prudential, humane, and at times forceful, reflects that ambivalence. The voyages were instruments of statecraft, whose consequences were felt in gilded courtrooms and in humble fishing villages alike. Centuries later, the question readers and mariners return to is not simply whether the treasure ships were large or how many ports they visited. It is whether the experiment, a state marshaling vast maritime resources to exchange gifts and secure networks, changed how the world connected. The answer resides in mixed ledger. New routes and diplomatic patterns persisted. State hunger for maritime prestige waned, but people's habits of cross-cultural exchange proved enduring. The quay where the fleet first gathered will continue to exist in a different register, not as a single moment frozen, but as a node in a long network of movement. Men who stepped from those ships carried back smell and story, a handful of foreign seeds, and the knowledge that an empire could send its will across oceanic distance. That knowledge altered imaginations and bureaucracies alike. Debates remain, and new fragments, an unearthed plank, a recently read ledger line, can still tilt our understanding. The empire's ships returned with goods and tales. The sea returned them changed. History keeps some doors open, and the exact fate of certain great ships and the fullest measure of impact still invite careful attention. A final ledger entry will be written in court archives and port registers alike. But the sea keeps other records in drift and memory, and those quieter archives are only beginning to be read.